Hello guys, welcome to my channel where stories filled with revenge, moral lessons, and love are told. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure you like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The snow was coming down hard that morning, thick flakes twisting in the wind like tiny ghosts, making every step on my way back from the lower pasture a battle. My name's William Granger, and out here in the far stretch of the Wyoming Territory in 1877, the land could be as cruel as it was beautiful. I'd been alone on my ranch for years, the quiet sometimes my friend, sometimes my worst enemy. That morning, I had no reason to think my life was about to change forever. I'd taken the long route home, figuring to check the old fence line near the East Ridge before the storm made it impossible. My boots crunched into the hardening snow, and the air bit at my cheeks like knives. That's when I saw something strange, dark shapes against the white, too still to be driftwood or brush. At first, I thought it might be a stray deer caught in the cold, but as I got closer, my heart began to hammer. A woman. She was tied to a fence post with coarse rope, her hair matted with ice, her dress torn and bloodied. In her arms, wrapped in the thinnest of blankets, were 3 tiny bundles of newborn babies. "Ma'am," my voice was hoarse against the wind. She stirred faintly, her cracked lips moving without sound. I dropped to my knees, fumbling with my gloves, trying to free her. The ropes had cut deep into her wrists, purple against her pale skin. I cursed under my breath, yanking my hunting knife free. "Hold on. I've got you." When the ropes fell, she sagged forward into my arms, and I caught the faint, pitiful cry of one of the babies. They were all alive, though barely little breaths, faces red and raw from the cold. "What's your name?" I asked, tucking the blankets tighter around the infants. "Annabelle," she whispered. "Please, don't let him." Her eyes fluttered closed before she could finish. I didn't waste another second. Lifting her was like carrying a feather, though her dead weight made it awkward with the babies still clutched against her. I shifted them into my coat, letting my own body heat shield them from the wind. The trek back to my cabin was brutal. The snow blinded me, the weight in my arms growing heavier with every step. I kept talking to her, to the babies, just to keep myself from thinking about what I'd find if they stopped breathing. "Stay with me, Annabelle. We're almost there. You're safe now." When I finally reached the cabin, my hands were numb and my legs near buckling. I kicked the door open and stumbled inside. The fire in the hearth had burned low, but the warmth felt like heaven. I laid her gently on my bed, the babies beside her, and hurried to throw more logs onto the fire until the flames roared. One by one, I checked the children. 3 girls. Perfect little girls, each with the faintest wisp of dark hair and tiny fists clenched as if ready to fight the whole world. I heated water, found the cleanest cloth I had, and began wiping the frost and blood from Annabelle's face. Her skin was cold as marble. I boiled the broth, but she was too weak to drink. I used a spoon to trickle warm water into her mouth, watching for any sign of life in her eyes. After what felt like hours, she blinked and met my gaze. "You're safe here," I told her. "No one's going to hurt you." Tears slipped down her temples, but she didn't speak. Her hands moved toward the babies, as if to reassure herself they were real and still breathing. I set about making them a place to sleep in 3 small baskets lined with the softest cloth I could find, close enough to the fire to keep warm. I didn't have much in the way of baby things, but I'd figure it out. I always did. As the night deepened, she drifted in and out of sleep, sometimes murmuring words I couldn't catch. Once, I heard her say, "Edward, please," but there was fear in her voice. I didn't push her. Whatever hell she'd been through, we'd face it when she had the strength to talk. The next day, I saddled my horse and rode into town for supplies, blankets, milk, and anything I thought a woman and 3 newborns might need. The shopkeeper raised his eyebrows at my purchases, but I ignored him. People in these parts thrived on gossip. The less they knew, the better. When I returned, Annabelle was awake, holding one of the babies to her chest. She looked stronger already, though her eyes still carried the haunted look of someone who'd been through the fire and barely made it out. "Why did you help me?" she asked softly. I shrugged. "Because no one else did." Her lips trembled, and for a moment I thought she'd cry, but instead she nodded and looked back at her daughters. "Their names are Eloise, Ruth, and June. Pretty names for little fighters." Over the next few days, the cabin changed. It had always been quiet, the kind of quiet that settles deep into your bones. But now there was the sound of small breaths, tiny cries, the rustle of blankets. Annabelle moved carefully, still sore, but she began to tend to her babies, humming lullabies under her breath. I didn't know the songs, but they filled the cabin with something I hadn't felt in years. I caught her watching me sometimes, a wary look in her eyes, as if waiting for the moment I'd send her away. But I had no intention of doing that. The storm raged for nearly a week, trapping us in the cabin. I chopped wood, mended tools, cooked what meals I could, and learned quickly how to hold a baby without making her cry. Eloise seemed to like my voice. Ruth had a strong grip for her size, and June slept more than the other two. One evening, as the wind howled outside, Annabelle finally spoke of what had happened. Her voice was steady at first, but I saw the tremor in her hands. My husband, Edward Blackwood, he wanted a son. When I gave birth to 3 girls, he said I'd cursed him. He tied me out there in the snow to let nature take care of me. Said I'd wasted his name. Anger flared in my chest, hotter than the fire in the hearth. He left you to die? She nodded. I thought I'd never see morning. Then you came. I looked at her, at the babies sleeping peacefully between us, and felt something I hadn't in years, a pull, like fate had shoved us into each other's lives for a reason. You're coming with me, I said quietly, though I meant it for the days ahead as much as that night. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw a spark of something in them, hope, maybe, or the faint belief that she and her girls might have a chance. And as the snow kept falling outside, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let Edward Blackwood or anyone else take them from me. The storm did not let up for another 2 weeks, and in that time, the cabin became our world. The blizzard outside was relentless, a constant white wall that erased the hills, the trees, and the sky itself. It pressed against the windows, howled at the door, and tried its best to remind us that winter in Wyoming could be merciless. But inside, I kept the fire roaring, the lamps lit, and the air as warm as I could manage for Annabelle and the girls. I'd lived alone for so long that I'd forgotten what it was to share space, to hear another person's breath in the night, or to wake to the sound of a baby fussing. At first, it was strange, her soft voice humming to them, the squeaky coos that broke the quiet, but before long, I found myself listening for those sounds, even smiling when I heard them. Annabelle was still weak. She tried to do more than she should, tending to the girls or moving about the cabin when she needed rest, and I had to gently tell her to sit before she fell over. You've been through hell, I told her one morning as I poured her some hot tea. You don't need to prove anything to me. Let yourself heal. She gave me a faint smile, the kind that never quite reached her eyes. It's not you I'm trying to prove something to, she said, and I understood she meant Edward. Every so often, I caught her glancing at the door, like she half expected him to come bursting through. I knew that look. It was the look of someone who had lived under a shadow for too long. The shadow stays in your mind, even when the sun's shining. I kept my questions to myself at first. She spoke a little each day, and I didn't want to push her faster than she could go. The truth trickled out like slow-melting ice. Edward Blackwood was not just a cruel husband. He was a man obsessed with his name, his bloodline. He ran a small ranch on the other side of town, a place his father had built from nothing. To him, a son was not just a child, it was an heir, a continuation of his legacy. When Annabelle had given him triplet girls, he'd called it a failure and said she'd shamed him in the eyes of the community. She told me about the night he'd dragged her from her bed, still aching from childbirth, and tied her to that fence post with the babies swaddled so poorly they barely stood a chance in the cold. He told me if I could survive the night, maybe I'd earned a place in his house again, she said, her voice flat, almost like she was reading from someone else's story. I had no words for a moment, only rage burning in my chest. Finally, I said, "You're never going back there." She nodded, but I saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes. Edward had power in town, friends who owed him favors, and enough money to make trouble for anyone who crossed him. The days passed, and the snow kept falling. I took on the role of protector without thinking about it much. I cut and hauled wood, made trips to the small shed for supplies, and fed the horses when the wind wasn't too fierce. When the cabin felt too small and the girls too restless, I'd take each of them in turn and walk slow laps around the room. talking about nothing in particular, how spring would come, how the grass on the ridge turned gold in summer, how maybe, just maybe, this winter would be kinder than the last. Annabelle began to smile more often, though never for long. Sometimes she laughed, soft and quick, when Eloise made a funny face or Ruth gripped my finger and refused to let go. June was the quietest, but her eyes followed everything, curious and steady. One night, after the babies were asleep, she sat by the fire sewing a small tear in her dress. Her hair caught the light, and for the first time I noticed it had a natural copper sheen under the dark strands. She looked at me and said, "You're different from what I expected." "What did you expect?" I asked. She hesitated. "Men who take in women like me usually want something in return. So far, you haven't asked for anything." "I'm not Edward," I said simply. The silence between us was comfortable after that. I didn't need to say more, and she didn't push. By mid-February, the snow finally eased. The hills emerged from their white prison, and the sound of melting ice dripping from the roof was a promise that spring was on its way. That same day, I caught Annabelle standing at the window, her arms wrapped around herself. "They'll come for me," she said quietly. I stepped beside her. "They'll have to go through me first." She shook her head. "You don't understand. Edward's the kind of man who doesn't forgive defiance. He'll say I stole his children." "They're your children," I said, my voice sharper than I meant. "And you didn't steal anything. He gave them up when he left you out there." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. That's not how men like him see it. The next week, we started going into town again for supplies. Word travels fast in a place like ours, and soon enough, folks started whispering. I ignored it, but I could tell Annabelle felt every glance, every muttered word. The truth didn't matter much to gossips. They'd believe the version that caused the most stir. Still, life in the cabin settled into a rhythm. The girls grew stronger each day, their cheeks round and pink from warmth and good food. I built a proper cradle, carving each of their names into the wood. When I showed it to Annabelle, she touched the letters with a trembling hand. "You didn't have to," she said. "I wanted to," I told her. That night, after she put them to bed, I found her staring into the fire. "Why do you care so much, William?" she asked. I thought about it for a long moment. "Because I know what it's like to have no one stand up for you." Her lips parted slightly, like she wanted to ask more, but she didn't. Instead, she nodded and whispered, "Thank you." March brought the first green shoots in the ground, and a sense that maybe we'd made it through the worst. But with the thaw came new dangers. One morning, as I was splitting wood, I saw Hattie Miller riding hard toward the cabin. She was a friend, sharp-eyed, quick-witted, and never one to waste words. She swung down from her horse before I could even greet her. "William, Edward Blackwood's been asking about Annabelle in town," she said, her voice low. "Says she ran off with his daughters, and he aims to get them back." I felt the weight of her words in my bones. "When? Soon. He's talking to some of the men who work for him." Inside, Annabelle was feeding June. She looked up when she saw my face. "It's him, isn't it?" she asked. I didn't lie. "Yes, but he's not taking you." Her hands tightened around the baby. "Then we'd better be ready." I had no idea just how ready we'd need to be. Hattie didn't just bring me the warning, she brought the sheriff into it. She might have been a busybody in some matters, but she knew when something was serious enough to need the law. Sheriff Tom Ellery wasn't the kind of man you could charm or buy, which made him one of the few in town Edward Blackwood couldn't bend to his will. That afternoon, Hattie went straight to his office and told him everything she knew. She didn't spare the details. The night Annabelle had been left in the snow, the newborns barely breathing, the rope burns on her wrists. When I brought Annabelle into town the next day, the sheriff listened to her story, his jaw set like stone. "You're saying he left you to die?" Ellery asked, leaning forward. "Yes, Sheriff," Annabelle replied, her voice steady but her hands trembling in her lap. "He said if I could survive the night, I could come back. He never came for us." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Then you're not the one running from the law here." "He is." I could see a sliver of relief in her eyes, but it was tangled with fear. She knew Edward wouldn't care about what was right, only about what was his. We didn't have to wait long. The very next morning, I saw 3 riders coming up the ridge. Even at a distance, I recognized Edward's broad shoulders and the arrogant tilt of his head. Behind him rode 2 men I didn't know, but I could tell from the way they carried themselves that they were there for trouble. I didn't waste time. Annabelle, take the girls into the back room, I told her. William, go. Now. She hesitated only a moment before scooping up Eloise and Ruth while I carried June. I set the baby down beside her sisters and shut the door to keep them hidden from whatever was about to happen. The knock on the cabin door wasn't a polite one. It was hard and loud, rattling the hinges. I opened it just enough to step outside, shutting it behind me. William Granger, Edward said, his eyes narrowing. I hear you've got something that belongs to me. I stood my ground. Nothing here belongs to you, Edward. His jaw tightened. That woman in your cabin? Those girls? They're mine. They're her daughters, I said, my voice low. And she's not your property. He laughed sharp, ugly. You think you can keep her? You think the law's going to side with some lonely rancher over me? I don't have to think, I said. The law already knows what you did. Sheriff Ellery's expecting you. That stopped him for a second. You went to the law? Annabelle did. The sneer faded from his face, replaced by something darker. He took a step closer, his voice dropping. You don't understand the kind of man you're crossing, Granger. Before I could reply, a voice rang out from behind him. I do. Sheriff Ellery rode up with Hattie close behind. The sheriff dismounted slowly, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. Edward Blackwood, you're under arrest for attempted murder, child endangerment, and abandonment. Edward's face turned red, and the two men with him shifted in their saddles. This is a mistake, he said, his voice cracking just slightly. No mistake, Ellery said. Now, you can come quiet, or I can drag you into town in front of everyone. For a moment, I thought Edward might try something. His eyes darted from me to the cabin, like he might still make a run for the girls. But in the end, the sight of the sheriff's gun convinced him otherwise. He was cuffed and taken away, cursing both me and Annabelle until they disappeared down the trail. When I stepped back inside, Annabelle was standing just beyond the door, holding all three babies in her arms. Her eyes searched mine. Is it over? She asked. For him? Yes, I said. For us, it's just beginning. Her breath trembled, but she smiled, really smiled, for the first time since I'd met her. The weeks that followed were quiet, almost strange in their peace. Spring finally broke through the last of the snow, and the land turned green again. Annabelle and I worked side by side mending fences, tending the small garden I'd planted years ago, and taking care of the girls. I started carving small wooden plaques, one for each of them, their names etched deep into the grain. Eloise, Ruth, and June. When I showed them to Annabelle, she touched each one like it was the most precious thing she'd ever held. You didn't have to do this, she said softly. I wanted to. One afternoon, I surprised her with something else, a shawl I'd woven in town, the girl's initials embroidered along the edge. She wrapped it around her shoulders, her eyes glistening. No one's ever done anything like this for me, she whispered. I didn't tell her then, but I'd been thinking about asking her to stay not just through the spring, but for good. A few weeks later, I found her in the doorway, watching the girls play on the floor. I stepped beside her, the words coming easier than I expected. Annabelle, I said, I want you here. Not because you need somewhere to go, but because I want you to choose to stay. She turned to me, her eyes wide. I do choose. We were married on a quiet morning in May, with Hattie and the sheriff as our witnesses. No big gathering, no fancy clothes, just the two of us making a promise that we would stand by each other, no matter what came. We opened the cabin to travelers not long after, calling it the Hearth at Granger Ridge. Folks came to know it as a place where the coffee was always hot, the fire was always burning, and there was always a welcome for anyone who needed shelter. The girls grew fast, each with her own spark, Eloise curious, Ruth stubborn, and June gentle but strong. Our life wasn't without hardship, but it was ours, built on trust, on quiet courage, and on the choice we'd made to stand together. And every evening, when the sun dipped behind the ridge and the firelight danced across Annabelle's face, I knew we'd turned something broken into something whole. Moral lesson: in the vast, unforgiving silence of winter, and the past has tried to bury you. Edward Blackwood's cruelty could have ended her story, but instead, it became the first chapter in a life filled with love, respect, and dignity. When the storms of life leave you stranded and alone, remember there are still people who will open their doors, offer warmth, and expect nothing in return. And when you meet those people, hold on to them. Build something with them. For anyone out there facing hardship, your story isn't over just because someone tried to write the ending for you. You get to choose how it continues. Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched your heart, please give it a like, share it with your friends so they can be inspired too, and subscribe for more stories of resilience, justice, and love. And don't forget to comment below with the lessons you took from Annabelle's journey.